By the time the sun came up over L.A., May 1st, 1992, parts of America's second largest city looked like a war zone. Thick black smoke hung over entire neighborhoods. Hundreds of buildings burning or already reduced to charred shells. Storefront windows were smashed. Looters, they moved through commercial districts carrying TVs, stereos, clothing, food, I'm sure, and anything else they could get their hands on. Gunfire echoed through the streets. Firefighters, they're trying to reach burning buildings. They were being attacked. Police officers, they pulled back from some of the worst areas, leaving entire sections of the city largely on their own. TV viewers across the country, well, they watched the whole chaos unfold live as news helicopters circle overhead, broadcasting images that seemed almost impossible to believe, but you better believe it. For many Americans, it looked as though L.A. had been simply exploded overnight. But it didn't begin with burning buildings, obviously, and smashed storefronts. It didn't even begin with the acquittal of the 4 L.A. police officers from beating Rodney King April 29, 1992. By the time that verdict was announced, years of anger, frustration, and distrust and resentment had already been building beneath the surface. Entire communities felt ignored by city leaders. Many residents, they believed the police, viewed them as suspects rather than citizens. Well, don't be suspects. Economic opportunities that had once supported working-class families, they're gone. Factories, they're closed. Jobs vanished. Gangs and drugs, they filled some of the void left behind. Tensions between different communities simmered across the city, while a series of highly publicized incidents convinced many people that the justice system treated some lives differently than others. The old verdict in the Rodney King case would become the spark, but that fuel had been accumulating and been pouring for a very long time.
Jury announced its decision that afternoon. The reaction, immediate. Crowds that gathered in different parts of the city. Anger turned into confrontation, violence. Hours passed. Motorists were being dragged from their vehicles at the intersection of Florence and Normandy. Businesses were being looted. Fires spreading. Darkness fell across the city. That's when all the rest of the mulligans came out. L.A. descended into one of
What the fuck is a mulligan playing golf?
Right. L.A. descended into one of the most destructive episodes of civil unrest in American history. By the time order was finally restored several days later, more than 60 people dead, thousands injured, 11,000 arrests, more than that, had been made. Property damage climbed past the billions of dollars. Entire neighborhoods would spend years trying to recover, while some never fully recovered at all.
Never.
More than 3 decades later, 1992 LA riots remain one of the most debated events in American history. Some see them primarily as a reaction to police brutality. Others point to poverty, unemployment, racial tensions, political failures, or a justice system that many residents no longer trusted.
Well, how about all of it?
Right. The truth is, no single explanation tells the whole story. If you want to understand why LA erupted in the spring of 1992, we have to go all the way back before the fires started burning and examine the decades of events that brought one of America's most famous cities to the breaking point.
Well, you got to understand that the city many people saw on TV, it wasn't the same city millions of residents experienced every day.
Right.
To outsiders, LA was often portrayed as a place of beaches, movie stars, palm trees, and endless opportunity. But beneath that image was a very different reality. See, there's more than just Hollywood and LA, guys. During the 70s and 80s, many of the neighborhoods that would later become the center of the riots, they've been struggling for years and years and years. South Central LA, in particular, was facing economic challenges that many residents felt city leaders either ignored or just failed to solve. Families who had lived in these neighborhoods for generations, they watched opportunities disappear while crime, poverty, and frustration seemed to grow with each passing year. For much of post-World War II era, manufacturing jobs have provided a path into middle class for many working families in LA. You had your automobile plants, your steel mills, your aerospace companies, tire factories, and you got some other industrial employers. You got some steady paychecks. You can buy a home, raise a family, and build stable life on one single income back then. But by the 70s and 80s, that economic foundation was beginning to crack, mainly due to crack.
True.
Companies closed facilities, moved operations elsewhere, or just eliminated jobs through new technologies and automation. Major employers that had once anchored entire communities, gone. One factory closure might put hundreds of people out of work in the same neighborhood.
Right.
Several closures across a region could devastate an entire neighborhood. Yes. As manufacturing declined, many of the replacement jobs, they paid less, offered fewer benefits, and provided little chance for advancement. Residents who had once expected to spend decades working at the same plant, they suddenly find themselves struggling to even make ends meet. Now you gotta go work at Mickey D's, McDowell's.
Right. The effects that rippled through the South Central and surrounding communities. Unemployment rose. Businesses closed. Empty storefronts became more common. Families that had once relied on stable industrial jobs increasingly found themselves dependent on low-paying service work or government assistance. Younger residents growing up during this period often saw fewer legitimate opportunities than their parents enjoyed. Schools struggling, public services stretched thin. Many neighborhoods that felt as they had been left behind, while wealthier parts of LA continued to prosper. The contrast could be impossible to miss. Just a relatively short drive separated some of the richest communities in all of America from neighborhoods where many families were fighting simply just to get that last saltine cracker.
Right.
At that very same time, LA was undergoing major demographic changes. African-American families had long called South Central home increasingly share the area with growing Latino populations, particularly immigrants from ACL in Central America. And you have the Korean immigrants also established businesses throughout many of these neighborhoods, often opening liquor stores, markets, small retail shops. Well, and
hurry up and buy.
well, many residents from different backgrounds lived and worked alongside one another without incident. Economic competition, language barriers, cultural misunderstandings, and differing experiences with discrimination sometimes created tensions. And those tensions did not always lead to open conflict. But they added another layer of complexity to communities already struggling under economic pressure. It's like an onion.
Right. Crime also became a growing concern during the 70s and 80s. Gang activity expanded and exploded in many parts of LA.
Yeah.
The Crips and the Bloods, along with the numerous smaller gangs, they became deeply entrenched in certain neighborhoods. The arrival of crack, like I said, during the mid-80s made an incredibly difficult situation even worse.
Did.
Drug addiction spread rapidly, violence increased, homicide rates climbed. Families, they watched sons, daughters, brothers, and friends come caught up in gangs, drugs, or both, get killed or overdose. Many residents trying to raise families and live in ordinary lives. For residents trying to raise families and live ordinary lives, daily life could often feel like a struggle against forces far beyond their control.
Right.
Many, they just wanted stronger action against crime.
Good luck.
But they also wanted fair treatment from the authorities responsible for enforcing the law.
All right.
You're asking for too much now,
That's
guys.
insane.
By the end of the 80s, frustration was building from multiple directions at once. Residents, they're angry about the lack of economic opportunity. They were worried about crime and gangs. They were concerned about the future of their neighborhoods. Many, they believe city leaders were disconnected from the realities they face every day. Well, no shit.
All right.
Others felt the police treated entire communities as potential criminals rather than citizens deserving protection and respect. None of those issues alone would cause the riots that erupted in 92, but together they did create an environment where trust was already fragile, and one major incident could trigger a much larger reaction. Long before Rodney King became a national name, LA was already a city carrying tensions, building for years, just waiting for something. They better not beat they better not beat a black dude today. They're waiting for something to finally bring them to the surface.
At the center of growing conflict between many LA residents and the Popo stood one man, Daryl Gates. To his supporter, Gates was a tough cop who was willing to take aggressive action against gangs, drugs, and violent crime. And this is at a time when many people believed the city was becoming increasingly dangerous. Like, you see this whole project area? We don't go there past 9.
Right.
Whatever calls we get, sorry. To his critics, he represented everything that was wrong with the LA Police Department. And by the early 90s, Gates had become one of the most polarizing law enforcement figures in all of America. He was admired by some and deeply disliked by others. Whether people loved him or hated him, there was no denying that he had left a massive imprint on both the LAPD and the city itself. Daryl Gates, he joined LAPD in 1949, spent decades climbing through the ranks. Along the way, he developed a reputation as an innovative but hard-lined officer. He helped develop the Special Weapons and Tactics concept, better known as SWAT. After a series of violent incidents during the 60s, convinced police leaders that traditional patrol officers needed specialized units capable of responding to heavily armed suspects. And at that time, many law enforcement agencies around the country, they looked at the idea as revolutionary. Like, Gates became known as someone who favored aggressive tactics and believed that strong enforcement was necessary to maintain order in a city as large and complex as LA.
Well, when he became chief of police, 78, Los Angeles was already dealing with many serious challenges. Violent crime remained a major concern. Gang activity expanded. Many residents, they believed the city was becoming increasingly dangerous. The drug trade was becoming increasingly sophisticated and profitable. Gates, he believed the answer was aggressive policing.
Oh.
Under his leadership, the LAPD embraced a philosophy that emphasized crime suppression, proactive enforcement, and overwhelming displays of force when necessary, he says. Many officers viewed themselves as soldiers in a war against crime.
No.
That's not the way to do it.
Right.
Particularly during the crack epidemic and gang violence that swept through the 80s. Supporters argued these tactics were needed because gangs and drug traffickers, they were more heavily armed and increasingly more violent.
Well, yeah.
But while many residents wanted crime reduced, not everyone agreed with how the LAPD was going about it.
I mean, you're crying, bitch, and complaining as nobody's doing anything about it. And then when they do something about it, you're like, well, you're not doing it correctly. Well, how would you do it?
Well, in many black and Latino neighborhoods, complaints about police conduct became increasingly common.
How about you throw a badge and a vest on and try to take care of these people? You're going to become violent.
Well, they're already violent without the badge,
Right.
apparently. Residents described officers stopping people for minor reasons, using excessive force, conducting aggressive searches,
That did happen, though.
and treating ordinary citizens with suspicion.
Yeah.
You just gotta driving while black.
Right.
Civil rights groups argued that entire neighborhoods were being subjected to policing tactics that would never, ever be tolerated in wealthier, predominantly white parts of LA.
I wonder why.
Stories of rough encounters with officers circulated through communities, reinforcing the belief that the old LAPD, they did in fact view certain residents as potential threats first and citizens second, not even second.
Senor Duck. These tensions, not new. Relations between the LAPD and many minority communities had been strained for decades. You have memories of 1965 Watts riots still lingering. Many older residents remember earlier accusations of police misconduct and discrimination. Rather than healing those wounds, critics argued that the department's increasingly militarized approach during the 80s only deepened the divide. Even people who had never personally been arrested or assaulted by the police, they often knew someone who claimed to have been. Whether every story was accurate or not, the cumulative effect was a growing lack of trust between the department and many of the people it served. Gates himself often became a source of controversy. Over the years, he made a number of public comments that critics viewed as insensitive, dismissive, or even racially offensive. Each controversy further damaged his relationship with community leaders and civil rights organizations. And by the late 80s, many activists were openly calling for reforms within the LAPD. And in some cases, they wanted Gates to step down.
Just like good fucking luck.
But Gates remained popular among many officers and among residents who believe crime fighting should remain.
Of course he's
the
remaining
department's top
popular
priority.
among officers. They're like, he lets us fucking literally just beat the shit out of
Right.
people without reprimands.
And this divide reflected a larger debate taking place throughout all of LA. People generally agreed that, yeah, I get it, gangs, drugs, and violence, it's all serious problems. But what they disagreed on was whether the LAPD's methods were solving those problems or just making them worse. And as the 80s came to a close, these tensions continued to build. Every controversial arrest, every allegation of brutality, every public dispute between popos and community activists added another layer of distress. Many residents felt that they were being policed but not protected. Many officers felt they were being criticized while risking their lives in some of the city's most dangerous neighborhoods. Well, put all that together, the result was a relationship that had become increasingly fragile. Long before Rodney King was beaten on a roadside in 1991, the foundation of trust between the LAPD and large portions of LA had already been badly damaged. This set the stage for an even greater confrontation in the years ahead.
I just remember in elementary school, kids used to just walk around saying,
Rodney
can't we all just get along?
Right, we all just- yeah.
By the late 80s, the LAPD, it was engaged in what many officials describe as war against gangs. Like we know, crack and spread, gang shootings. They were making headlines on not almost a daily basis, but a daily basis.
Right.
Residents were understandably frightened and demanded action. Politicians, they wanted results too. We got to get reelected, buds.
Right.
Police leaders wanted to show they were taking control of the situation. And out of that environment came one of the most controversial enforcement programs in Los Angeles history, Operation Hammer. Supporters viewed it as a necessary response to a growing crisis. Critics, they saw it as a campaign that treated entire communities like enemy territory. They probably were, too.
Right.
Regardless of where people stood, Operation Hammer would play a major role in shaping how many residents viewed the old LAPD by the time those riots erupted in 92. Well, that operation officially began in 87 under Daryl Gates and was designed to target gang activity across LA, particularly in South Central and East LA. Concept was simple. Rather than waiting for crimes to occur, the old LAPD would flood gang-heavy neighborhoods with large numbers of officers, conduct massive sweeps, make arrests, serve warrants, search suspected gang locations, and demonstrate an overwhelming police presence. In theory, the strategy would disrupt gang operations, take dangerous criminals off the streets, and restore some order to these communities that become increasingly violent.
All right.
But the name itself reflected the department's mindset. The LAPD intended to hit gangs hard and hit them often.
I mean, come on. That's how you do it.
The scale was enormous. Over the course of several years, tens of thousands of people were arrested. Some raids involved hundreds of officers moving through neighborhoods at the same time. One of the most famous ones occurred during a weekend sweep in April of '88, when roughly 1,000 officers flooded parts of South LA and arrested more than 1,400 people. The number sounded impressive at press conferences and in news reports. LAPD leaders pointed to the arrests as proof they were taking action against gangs. We said we're doing what we said. But there was a major problem. Many of the people being arrested were never charged with serious crimes. In some cases, individuals were detained, booked, and just released because there was insufficient evidence to even prosecute them. Critics argued that the department was prioritizing arrest statistics over actual criminal convictions.
I mean, what are you going to do?
Look how many people we arrested.
Right. Wow. Residents, they frequently described the sweeps as overwhelming and intimidating. Entire blocks they could suddenly fill with police vehicles. Helicopters hovered overhead. Officers moved through the streets, alleyways, apartment complexes, and parking lots, looking for suspects. Young Black and Latino men often stopped, questioned, searched, and detained. For many residents, it felt as though they were being treated as suspects simply because where they lived. Even people who supported tougher action against gangs sometimes questioned whether the department's tactics were going too far. Parents worried about their children being swept up in mass arrests. Community leaders argued that innocent people were being caught in the dragnet along with actual gang members. One incident became a symbol of everything critics believed was wrong with Operation Hammer. It was the month of August, year of 1988. LAPD officers raided apartment buildings at 39th Street and Dalton Avenue, South Central LA. Nearly 90 officers participated in the operation. Residents later accused officers of smashing walls, breaking furniture, destroying personal property.
Gotta find those drugs.
All right, and assaulting people. Despite the massive raid, police found little evidence of major crime. No significant charges resulted from the operation. Lawsuits followed, and the city eventually paid millions in settlements.
Wow.
For many, the Dalton Avenue raid reinforced the belief that the LAPD was willing to use extraordinary force, even when the results failed to justify the tactics.
Jeez.
Wow.
As Operation Hammer expanded, complaints of police brutality continued to rise. The issue became so serious that independent investigators later examined patterns within the department. Reports, they found that a relatively small number of officers generated a disproportionately large number of excessive force complaints. Yet discipline was often limited or just didn't exist.
Right.
Community activists argued that the department had developed a culture where officers rarely face consequences for misconduct.
I mean, what are you going to do?
Ain't not one officer telling on his brother.
Nope.
Meanwhile, many officers felt they were being unfairly criticized while dealing with dangerous criminals in some of the toughest neighborhoods in America.
Right.
That divide between the popos and the residents continued to widen. What made Operation Hammer particularly important was that it shaped daily life for countless people who'd never even committed a crime or thought about it. Long before old Rodney became a household name. I mean, talking about Carrington. Thousands of LA residents had already formed opinions about the LAPD based on personal experiences during these gang sweeps. Some believed the department was doing necessary work in dangerous neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Others believed the police had become an occupying force that treated entire communities as suspects.
Yeah.
By the early 90s, these competing views had hardened into deep distrust. When the Rodney King beating occurred, many residents didn't see it as an isolated incident again.
Right.
Instead, they viewed it through the lens of years of aggressive policing, controversial raids, mass arrests, and allegations of abuse that had become synonymous with Operation Hammer. The stage, it was being set for a confrontation that would soon capture the attention of the whole world.
Well, L.A. was struggling with rising crime, aggressive policing, economic hardship. Another story, well, it was unfolding in neighborhoods across the city that few people outside Southern California paid much attention. Throughout the 70s and 80s, gang violence had become one of the defining problems facing many communities. The two most infamous gangs, Crips and Bloods. They had grown from relatively small street organizations to sprawling networks made up of dozens of individual sets, many of which were engaged in deadly rivalries.
Yeah.
Shootings, retaliatory attacks, Turf disputes had become a tragic part of everyday life. Entire generations grew up knowing people who had been murdered, wounded, or imprisoned because of gang violence. And by the early 90s, many residents were exhausted by the bloodshed and desperate for something to change. Enough is enough, and it's time for a change.
I'm not a nugget.
Yes, we can. The crack cocaine epidemic only made it worse. Drug money poured into neighborhoods during the 80s. Competition for territory became even more intense. Some gangs transformed from loosely organized street groups into increasingly sophisticated criminal enterprises with access to large amounts of money and firearms. Homicide climbed. Young men dying at alarming rates. Families lived with constant fear that a loved one could become the next victim of a drive-by shooting or gang-related attack, or even themselves just sitting there watching Johnny Carson, and the next thing you know, they're ducking heads. While police focus heavily on suppression
given the demographic of these neighborhoods, I highly doubt anybody was watching Johnny Carson.
Richard Pryor was on. While police focus heavily on suppression efforts like Operation Hammer, many residents began searching for ways to reduce the violence from within their own communities. I'm about to get these, the rec centers after school, shit like that.
That helps.
Right. One of the people who emerged as a leading voice for change, former gang member himself, Aquila Sherrills. He grew up in Watts. Sherrills had experienced firsthand the devastating toll of gang warfare was taken on local neighborhoods.
Is that like that movie, Original Gangsters?
Right.
With Jim Brown?
Or
badass movie.
Along with our community leaders, clergy memberships, activists, and former gang members, he became involved in efforts to bring rival gangs together in hopes of reducing the violence. It was not an easy task. Decades of bloodshed, personal grudges, and retaliation cycles had created deep mistrust between rival groups. Convincing gang members to sit down and talk required patience, credibility, and the willingness to take significant personal risk. Yeah, at any moment, shit hits the fan. The most important breakthrough came in Watts, one of the LA's most historically troubled neighborhoods. Representatives from rival Crip and Blood factions began meeting to discuss the possibility of peace. Well, those discussions were often tense. Many participants had lost friends or even family members to gang violence.
Oh, no shit.
Right. Some had personally exchanged gunfire with the very people sitting across from them.
That's probably true, yeah.
Just before they came in the door.
All right, man, let's go talk.
Yeah, there was also a growing recognition that the constant violence was destroying the communities and accomplishing little beyond filling cemeteries and prisons. And the talks continued despite setbacks, disagreements, and skepticism from people who doubted any agreement could last more than an hour.
Well, guess what, though? Spring of 92, something remarkable happened. Leaders from several major rival gangs reached an agreement, which became as the Watts Truce. Well, not every gang in Los Angeles participated, of course. While not every member immediately embraced the agreement, the truce represented one of the most significant gang peace efforts in the city's history. It was formally announced April 28, 1992, and the timing couldn't have been more extraordinary. Just less than 24 hours later, guess what? That old jury in the Rodney King case would deliver its verdict.
No.
The coincidence has led to the most persistent misconceptions about the riots. Many people assume gangs were primarily responsible for the violence that followed.
All right.
The reality is actually far more complicated. Gang members obviously participated in some of the unrest, just as many non-gang members did too. However, the newly established truce actually reduced some of the gang-on-gang violence that authorities had feared might erupt during the crisis.
Right.
In certain areas, rival gang members who had recently agreed to stop shooting each other, they found themselves navigating the same citywide chaos together. They were probably trying to help reduce some looting, I would assume, right?
Right. You think.
Some community leaders later argued that the truce may have prevented even greater bloodshed during the riots by reducing the likelihood of separate gang wars breaking out at the same time, because, hey, all this shit's going on, might as well.
Speculation.
That don't mean the truce solved LA's gang problem. Obviously, it didn't. Many rivalries, they continue to this day. Violence didn't disappear either. Some participants eventually drifted away from the agreement, and not all neighborhoods experienced the same level of success.
Right.
But that existence of the truce serves as an important reminder that the story of LA in 92, it's not just criminals, police, and riots. You got criminals coming together.
Right.
At the very moment the city stood on the edge of one of the greatest crises in its history, there was some people working behind the scenes to stop it rather than create it.
Right.
The Watts Truce demonstrated that many residents were actively searching for solutions to the problems tearing their communities apart. Unfortunately for them, though, before anyone could see whether those efforts might succeed on a larger scale, there was another event that was about to push LA toward a breaking point. And this event involved a 15-year-old girl named Latasha Harlan.
Son of a bitch. Oh, well, if Rodney King getting beat up became the spark that ignited L.A. in 1992, well, the killing of Tasha Harlan is one of the reasons so much fuel had already accumulated. Long before the riots began, many residents in South Central were still angry about what had happened to the 15-year-old girl. When people later tried to understand why Korean-owned businesses became major targets during the riots, why emotions ran so high in certain neighborhoods, and why some residents felt so much deep resentment towards the courts, the story of Latasha Harlins was impossible to ignore. Latasha Harlins, born July 14th, year 1975. Friends, family remembered her as a bright, athletic, and determined young girl. She enjoyed basketball and dreamed about the future like countless other teenagers her age. Her childhood, well, was not without hardship. Latasha was just 6. Her mother, Crystal Harlins, shot and killed in a dispute involving another woman.
Damn, woman-on-woman violence.
The loss devastated the family. After her mother's death, Latasha and her younger brother were largely raised by their grandmother, Ruth, who became a large central figure in their lives.
They call her Big Mama.
Right. Despite the tragedy, family members later described Latasha as resilient, energetic, and full of potential. Well, on the morning of the 16th of March, 1991, Latasha, she entered an Empire Liquor Market. It's a small convenience store located on the corner of 91st Street and Figueroa Avenue in South L.A. The store was owned by Korean immigrants Soon Ja-do and her husband. At first, nothing about the visit seemed unusual. Latasha picked up a bottle of orange juice from a refrigerator and walked toward the counter. What happened over the next few seconds would become one of the most controversial incidents in LA history.
According to surveillance footage later reviewed during the investigation and the trial, Du believed Latasha was attempting to steal the bottle of orange juice, while walking to the counter. The store owner later claimed she suspected shoplifting because she saw Latasha place the juice into her backpack. Latasha, however, had money in her hand and appeared prepared to pay for the item.
Right.
Situation quickly escalated into a confrontation. Security video showed Du grabbing Latasha by her sweater. A struggle followed. Latasha struck Du several times, knocking the older woman to the floor. The teenager then turned and began walking toward the exit with the bottle of orange juice in one hand and money in the other.
Oh, jeez.
What happened next shocked many people who later viewed the footage. As Latasha moved towards the door, Du reached behind the counter, grabbed a handgun, and followed her. Surveillance video showed Latasha walking away when Du fired a single shot into the back of her head.
Oh.
The 15-year-old collapsed to the floor and died instantly.
I bet.
The entire encounter, from the initial accusation to the fatal gunshot, lasted only a matter of seconds.
Son of a bitch.
That killing immediately generated outrage throughout parts of L.A.
Yeah.
To many residents, particularly within the black community, the surveillance footage seemed straightforward. They saw a teenager had money to pay for the juice, leaving the store, and was shot in the back of the head while no longer posing an immediate threat.
Oh, wow.
Community activists demanded justice. Family members mourned a young girl whose life had just been cut short over a damn bottle of orange juice.
Right.
The case quickly became a major local news story and added to already existing tensions between some black residents and those Korean store owners in South L.A.
Wow.
Well, when old Soon Ja-do went on trial, prosecutors, they argued that the shooting was completely unjustified.
Oh, wow.
Guess what? The jury agreed. November of 91, Du was convicted of voluntary manslaughter. Serious felony, carried significant prison time. Many observers, the conviction appeared to be a step toward accountability, but real controversy is still to come. It's because at sentencing, Judge Joyce Carlin rejected the prosecution's request for prison time. Instead, she sentenced Du to 5 years probation, 400 hours of community service, and just a measly $500 restitution payment and court costs. Wow. She would serve no jail time whatsoever. The decision stunned many people. Critics argued that if their circumstances had been reversed, a much harsher sentence would have been imposed.
Damn right.
Protests erupted. Community leaders condemned the ruling. Demonstrators gathered outside the courthouses and government buildings. The Latasha Harlins Justice Committee organized rallies and demanded that the sentence be reconsidered.
Okay.
Yeah, is that possible? I don't think it is.
Nah, maybe.
For many residents, not once that gavel's.
Can the prosecuting appeal?
Of course, you can appeal.
Prosecutors can? I don't think prosecutors can.
Oh, prosecutor? That'd be weird. Oh, prosecutors? Yeah, why not?
Appeal.
They're the ones trying the case, yeah.
Yeah, I guess if somebody's found guilty, can appeal.
Right. For many residents already frustrated with the criminal justice system, the outcome felt like confirmation that some victims, they just mattered less than the others. And it's certainly looking that way.
Damn right. Well, the timing made the situation even more volatile. Sentencing occurred just months after Rodney King got beat down. and that was captured on video. Well, half of it. Well,
the whole thing was on video.
Half of it was released. In the minds of many Angelinos, the two cases became linked. One involved a black teenager killed by a store owner who avoided prison. The other involved police officers seen beating a black motorist on videotape. More to that story. Both cases fueled growing concerns about fairness, accountability, and equal justice under the law. By the time 1992 arrived, anger over Latasha Harlins had not faded away. Her name was still being mentioned at community meetings, protests, and public gatherings. Many residents believed justice had never been served. Looking back, the killing of Latasha became far more than an isolated criminal case. It became a symbol. To some, it symbolized the failures of the justice system. To others, it represented the growing tensions between communities that often lived side by side, but did not always understand one another.
It's language barriers.
And the tragedy left deep wounds that had never fully healed. When LA erupted in April 1992, more than a year after Tasha's death, those wounds would once again be ripped open as the city descended into chaos. The next event, to push LA closer to the edge, would place the city under a national spotlight and introduce the entire country to a man named Rodney King.
And like we mentioned, just 13 days before Latasha was killed, another incident had already placed Los Angeles on a collision course with history. The night of March 3rd, 1991, a 25-year-old construction worker named Rodney Glenn King. Well, he and some buddies were driving through the San Fernando Valley when he attracted the attention of the California Highway Patrol. What began as a routine traffic stop would soon become one of the most famous police encounters ever recorded, and would ultimately change Los Angeles, the LAPD, and the national conversation about policing. Rodney wasn't a celebrity, he wasn't a politician, or even an activist. He was just an ordinary man whose life had been included with both struggles and mistakes. He was like every normal guy.
Yeah.
Born in Sacramento in 1965, raised in Altadena near Pasadena. He grew up in a working-class family, experienced many of the same challenges facing the countless young men in Los Angeles during the 70s and 80s. He had previous run-ins with the law, which included a robbery conviction that had resulted in prison time. By 91, he was on parole. On the night of March 3rd, he had been drinking with friends and later admitted that he feared being sent back to prison if the Popo discovered he had violated the conditions of his parole.
Oh, shit.
So what is that going to make somebody do?
Right. Goodness.
Approximately 12:30 in the morning, California Highway Patrol officers spotted King's Hyundai speeding along the Foothill Freeway.
Speeding.
Estimates placed his vehicle at well over 100 miles an hour.
Okay.
The officers activated their lights and attempted to conduct a traffic stop. Instead of pulling over immediately, he continued driving.
I mean, come on. It's right there.
What followed was an 8-mile pursuit that wound through freeways and surface streets at dangerous speeds.
I mean, come on.
Additional patrol units joined the chase as helicopters tracked the vehicle from above. Eventually, King exited the freeway and stopped near Hanson Dam on the Lakeview Terrace area of Los Angeles. The situation appeared to be going to an end. King's 2 passengers, they were taken into custody without no incidents. King himself stepped out of the vehicle. Officers said, "Get out on the ground! Get out on the fucking ground!" You know, they love to swear. And
right.
What happened over the next several minutes would later be examined by juries, investigators, journalists, politicians, and millions of ordinary Americans. The precise details of King's actions during those moments would become a central point of the controversy. Officers, they claim King resisted arrest and refused commands.
He did.
Critics argued that whatever resistance occurred didn't justify what followed.
Oh, get the fuck
Maybe it didn't.
Maybe not, but he did resist arrest. After doing 100 mile an hour and an 8-mile chase, I mean...
There's one thing everybody could agree on, though. A confrontation did occur, and unlike countless police encounters before, much of it was captured on video.
Exactly. Well, just a short distance away, local resident named George Holliday. He'd been awakened by the noise of the police activity. He was curious, as anybody would be, about what the commotion was outside his apartment. Holliday stepped into his balcony, carrying a recently purchased camcorder, of course. Looking down toward the scene, he began recording. At first, he had no way of knowing he was documenting a moment that would become one of the most important pieces of video footage in modern American history. His camera captured LA police officers surrounding Rodney King. His camera also captured officers striking him repeatedly with batons. It also captured kicks, blows, and moments of chaos that would soon be replayed over and over and over and over again on TV screens all across the country, and especially LA. The footage showed King on the ground, attempting to rise, falling again, being struck repeatedly by officers. Later investigations would determine that Officer Lawrence Powell delivered the majority of the baton blows, while other officers participated in varying degrees. Sergeant Stacy Kuhn supervised the scene.
Good boys.
Right. Officers Timothy Wind and Theodore Brisano, they were also involved. And by the time the encounter ended, King had suffered serious injuries, including skull fractures, facial fractures, broken bones, damaged teeth, and numerous bruises and lacerations. He was eventually handcuffed and transported for medical treatment.
That's a little excessive.
Yeah.
Just when you're cracking skulls.
Right.
I
mean, I could see the cops are pissed. This went on a 8-mile, 100-mile-an-hour chase, and then the dude's resisting arrest. But they did go a little out of control. The very following day, George Holliday brought his videotape to local television station KTLA. News producers immediately recognized its significance.
they said, oh, shit, this is good. This is juicy right here.
like,
George, we'll give you
yeah.
$5.
Yeah. 4th of March 1991, the footage aired on television screens. Within hours, it spread across the country. National networks picked it up. Soon, millions of Americans watched what had happened. Again and again, viewers saw police officers surrounding a man on the ground and striking him repeatedly with batons. They just showed that part. That's all they ever did, too. For many people, no further explanation seemed necessary. They believed they were witnessing a clear example of excessive force by the popo. Others argued that the video showed only part of the encounter and lacked crucial context with the dead. But regardless of interpretation, the footage ignited an enormous public reaction.
But the timing couldn't have been worse for the old LAPD. Years of complaints about police brutality, aggressive gang sweeps, and strained community relations already damaged trust between the department and many residents. Now, there was visual evidence that seemed to confirm everything critics had been saying. Community leaders demanded accountability. Civil rights organizations organized protests.
Okay.
Politicians called for investigations.
Right.
Demonstrators gathered outside police facilities carrying signs and chanted against police brutality. The outrage was not confined to L.A. either.
No.
Across the United States, people debated what they had seen and what it said about policing in America. The federal government, they quickly became involved. The FBI opened an investigation. Los Angeles officials faced mounting pressure to act.
Right.
Within days, the officers involved were suspended, and public attention remained fixed on the case. The Rodney King beating became a national story, unlike almost any police incident that had come before it. In an era before smartphones and social media, millions of people had witnessed what appeared to be police violence with their own eyes for the first time. The images were impossible to ignore. The question now was, what would happen to the officers responsible? And for the next year, L.A. would wait for an answer. As that wait continued, tensions throughout the city continued to grow.
Yep.
As the King video spread across the country, it became far more than a local Los Angeles news story. Within days, the footage was being shown repeatedly on national television. Morning news programs discussed it, dissected it. Even newscasts, they analyzed it. Talk radio hosts debated it. Newspapers across the country placed the story on their front pages, back pages, third pages, 6 pages.
Right.
In an era before YouTube, smartphones, social media, it was rare for a single piece of video to be seen by so many people so quickly.
Yeah, it's called propaganda, baby.
Well, millions of Americans watched the same images and formed their own opinions. For many viewers, the video seemed pretty straight. They saw several popos just beating the shit out of one guy.
Right.
The footage appeared to validate years of complaints. It became one of the most powerful symbols of police brutality in modern American history.
Well, the reaction in L.A., immediate. Community leaders, civil rights organizations, clergy members, neighborhood activists demanded accountability. Many residents who had long complained about police misconduct felt vindicated. For years, they had been telling reporters, politicians, and anyone that was willing to listen that there's some abusive shit going on with these police officers and nobody's doing anything about it. Now, there's videotape. The incident no longer based on competing stories from police officers and civilians. He said, she said bullshit's out the window now, baby.
Well,
People could see at least part of what happened for themselves. Demonstrations began taking place throughout the city. Protesters gathered outside police facilities, government buildings. Some demanded the resignation of Chief Daryl Gates. Others called for sweeping reforms within LAPD. The anger was real. But so was a growing sense that perhaps this time things might actually change. The pressure quickly reached City Hall. LA Mayor Tom Bradley, he found himself facing questions from reporters, community leaders, and concerned residents. Bradley, he was no stranger to conflict with the LAPD. Before entering politics, he had spent more than 20 years as a LA police officer.
oh, well, he's got his brother's backs.
And eventually becoming a lieutenant before leaving the department. He was also the city's first black mayor and understood the concerns being expressed by many residents. He was trying to calm tensions. Well, while doing that, Bradley also recognized that the city needed a credible response. Simply asking people to trust the system, it wasn't going to work anymore. One of the most significant responses came in April of 1991. Weeks after the beating, city leaders created what became known as the Christopher Commission, officially called the Independent Commission on the LAPD. It was led by attorney Warren Christopher, who would later become Secretary of State under President Bill Clinton. Oh. The commission was tasked with examining not only the Rodney King incident, but broader allegations of excessive force, misconduct, and management failures within the LAPD. Over the following months, investigators reviewed thousands of documents, examined disciplinary records, interviewed officers and community members. They also attempted to determine whether the King beating reflected a larger problem inside the department.
I think it does. The commission's findings, they were troubling. Released in July of 91, the report concluded that the King incident wasn't simply the result of a few bad officers acting independently. Investigators, they found evidence suggesting that excessive force complaints, they were concentrated among certain officers, and that many of those officers faced little to none, no discipline.
Right.
The report described a culture in which misconduct was sometimes tolerated, complaints were often dismissed, and accountability mechanisms are inadequate. Also criticized the department's relationship with minority communities and recommended a series of reforms aimed at improving oversight and rebuilding public trust.
Okay.
To many critics of the LAPD, the report confirmed what they have already been saying for years and years. Meanwhile, the officers involved in the beating, they were facing some criminal charges.
Okay.
March of 91, a grand jury indicted Sergeant Stacy Kuhn and officers Lawrence Powell, Theodore Briseno, and Timothy Wind. The charges included assault and excessive use of force. For many residents, the indictments appeared to be a sign that justice may finally be served for once. Yet, even as the legal process moved forward, concerns began to emerge about how the trial would unfold.
Wow.
Defense attorneys argued that the extensive publicity surrounding the case made it impossible for their clients to receive a fair trial in L.A. or probably anywhere in the country at this point.
Right.
They requested that the proceedings be moved elsewhere.
Maybe the UP of Michigan or something.
Right. Right. That request would prove enormously significant. July 91, an appellate court, they agreed to relocate the trial from Los Angeles to nearby Ventura County. Who cares? More specifically, the case would be heard in Simi Valley.
Oh.
It's a suburban community northwest of Los Angeles. A bunch of whiteys.
Yeah.
The decision immediately generated controversy. You see, Simi Valley had a large population of current and former law enforcement officers and was generally viewed as a more conservative and pro-police than many parts of LA had.
Okay.
Critics feared that moving the trial would make convictions less likely. Supporters of the change argued that it was necessary to ensure an impartial jury. Regardless of the reasoning, the decision fueled additional skepticism among residents who already distrusted the system.
Right.
I'd be pretty skeptical, too, because that's a bullshit, man.
Yeah, that's like someone from a redneck place in Tennessee getting a trial moved to Memphis.
Right.
And you'd be like, oh, wait a minute here. Oh, wait a minute here.
Or vice versa.
Right. Months passed. Anticipation became almost unbearable. Every court hearing generated headlines. Every legal motion analyzed by reporters. Community leaders urged calm, but also warned that many residents were watching closely. The memory of Rodney King beating remained fresh. So did the anger surrounding the killing of Latasha Harlins and the sentence imposed in that very case. Throughout L.A., people wondered whether the justice system would finally hold powerful individuals accountable, or would they just have another controversial verdict just to piss people off. By early 1992, the city was waiting for a trial that had already become much bigger than 4 police officers. Many residents, the outcome would be seen as a test of whether equal justice truly existed in L.A. or the whole fucking country at that. The trial began in March 1992, and before long, all eyes were focused on the courtroom in Simi Valley. The trial of the 4 LAPD officers, March 1992, began in Ventura County, Superior Court in Simi Valley. From the moment it started, it was very clear this would not be an ordinary criminal case. Rodney King and his beating had become one of the most widely discussed incidents in all of America. Millions of people had seen that videotape. Countless others had read about it in papers or watched news reports covering every development. After the selection process was completed, the final jury consisted of 10 white jurors, 1 Hispanic juror, 1 Asian American juror, no blacks.
Well,
Several jurors had family connections to law enforcement or military service.
It should not have been allowed.
Nope. Critics immediately expressed concern that the jury might be more sympathetic to police officers than a jury selected in L.A.
Well, see, that's not even fair, though, either.
Right. Supporters of the venue change argued that
There's got to be a city around California that hates police and crime equally.
Right. Supporters of the venue change argued that the jurors had been chosen according to the law and were capable of rendering a fair verdict. We went through a strict process to select these jurors. You don't even know how many people we dismissed. We almost ran through the whole population of Simi Valley. The composition of the jury, well, became a major topic of discussion long before opening statements began. Well, they still went in the trial.
No choice.
Prosecution entered the trial, believing it possessed one of the most powerful pieces of evidence, the George Holiday videotape. Prosecutors argued that the footage showed officers using excessive and unnecessary force against Rodney King after he had largely been subdued. They emphasized the repeated baton strikes, the kicks, the blows that left King seriously injured. Witnesses described King's injuries and the circumstances surrounding their arrest as well. Prosecutors also introduced testimony regarding departmental policies governing the use of force. Their goal, straightforward, convince jurors that what happened that night went far beyond what was legally justified during an arrest. Let's just take this guy. Yes, he was doing 100 mile an hour. Yes, it went over 8 miles. Yes, he may have been a little uncooperative at first when they got pulled over. But the video clearly shows.
Some excessive force was there. And when you got cracked skulls and all that shit, I mean, come on, man.
Right.
A couple hits with the baton. I mean, it ain't nothing. But when you start cracking skulls,
I mean, I would expect
principal from the Breakfast Club.
In 1991, 100 mile per hour chase for 8 miles, especially a black guy getting pulled over. Yeah, they were gonna give him a few shots.
And then, how many more times has this happened that didn't get videotaped?
Right. And they say he was resistant, but all it takes for them to repeat themselves twice. That's it. Get out of the fucking car!
Well, the camera view.
Get out of the fucking car!
In the video, it did show him getting back up.
Yeah.
Repeatedly.
He was trying to get back up. So,
I guess we'll see.
Stay down, bud.
Well, the defense approached the case from a very different angle. Rather than denying that force had been used, I mean, it's pretty obvious, the defense argued that the officers were acting within the scope of their training and responding to what they believed was a dangerous suspect. Old Rodney King's high-speed chase, his physical size, and his actions during the arrest, they became central components of their argument. Defense attorneys maintained that King had resisted arrest and posed a threat to officers at the scene.
He did.
They argued that the videotape did not show the entire encounter. It didn't. And that viewers who only saw the footage lacked important context about what had occurred before the camera began recording.
Very true.
One of the most influential moments of the trial involved the way the videotape itself was presented. Many people expected the video to speak for itself, but the defense took a highly effective approach by slowing the footage down, frame by frame, and analyzing individual movements. Using expert witnesses and police training explanations, defense attorneys attempted to show that each baton strike was a reaction to a specific action by King. Jurors were encouraged to view the incident not as a continuous beating, but as a series of split-second decisions made during a tense arrest. What many Americans saw as obvious brutality was being presented inside the courtroom as a textbook example of police officers following their training and doing exactly what they were told to do.
I mean, it was a little bit of both, but it was clearly excessive.
Imagine if whoever thought that, let's slow it down and see if his arms come up or his legs come up right before he gets struck by a baton every time.
Right. I mean, this whole case here was a shit show. But what are you gonna do? Strategy proved far more successful than many observers expected. Trial progressed. Some legal analysis. They began warning that the outcome was far from certain. Outside the courtroom, however, many residents of L.A. remained convinced that convictions were likely. After all, they had seen the same videotape countless times. Community leaders urged calm and patience. But there was also a widespread belief that acquittals would be difficult to justify, given the visibility of the evidence. And for most people, the trial had become a test of whether the justice system could hold police officers accountable when misconduct appeared to be caught on camera. After weeks and weeks of testimony, the case was finally handed to the jury. Deliberations began in late April 1992, and all across L.A., people waited anxiously for a decision. Businesses discussed the case. Churches discussed the case. Families discussed the case around the dinner tables. News organizations prepared special coverage plans. I can just see
They had their graphics ready to roll.
I can just see the black family across the street and the white family across the street, each at the dinner table, talking about the same case, but totally
Right. Totally. He fucking deserved it. Those fucking corrupt cops.
All right. Well, the damn motherfucker wouldn't. If it would just comply with officers when we're having this shit. It happens. News organizations prepared special coverage plans. Police departments reviewed contingency procedures. City officials quietly worried about what might happen if the verdict did not match public expectations. The memories of Rodney King beaten were still fresh, and so were the frustrations surrounding years of police and controversies. Operation Hammer, and the Letitia Harlan's case as well.
Oh, Latasha.
Yep. The city was already carrying an enormous amount of tension. Then, April 29th, 1992, the jury returned with its verdict. Officer Theodora Brizano is acquitted on all charges. Officer Timothy Wynn, acquitted on all charges. Sergeant Stacy Kuhn, acquitted on all charges. Officer Lawrence Powell, acquitted on most charges, with the jury deadlocked on one count. Legally, the officers won. For many residents watching the announcement, the verdict felt like a stunning rejection of what they believed they had seen on videotape with their own eyes. Like, what are you doing? Within minutes, anger began spreading all across L.A. Crowds started gathering. People poured into the streets. The city was about to enter one of the darkest chapters in its history.
Well, on that afternoon, L.A. stood at a crossroads. The verdict had just been announced. Almost immediately, the city began reacting. TV stations interrupted regular programming. Radio hosts took calls from angry listeners. People gathered in homes, workplaces, barbershops, restaurants, community centers to discuss what just happened. For many residents, particularly in black neighborhoods, the verdict felt like a betrayal.
Oh.
They had watched the tape and they had listened to the months of testimony. They had waited more than a year for justice. Now, in their view, the system had once again protected those in power. The anger was not confined to a few individuals. It spread quickly through communities that already felt ignored, mistreated, and unheard.
Yeah.
Mayor Tom Bradley responded almost immediately. Speaking publicly after the verdict, he expressed disappointment and frustration, saying the decision could not blind us to what we saw on the videotape.
Well,
community leaders, they urged calm. Religious leaders, they asked residents not to respond with violence. Well, you got to ask your residents what you already know they're going to do. Then,
right.
Civil rights organizations called for peaceful demonstrations. Yet, beneath those appeals was a growing sense that the city was entering dangerous territory. Many of the people, they remembered the Watts riots of 1965. Others feared that years of tension were finally reaching a breaking point. What nobody knew, though, was just how quickly that breaking point would spiral out of control. As the afternoon wore on, small groups of people began gathering at intersections throughout South LA. One location in particular would soon become the center of the unfolding crisis, which was the center of Florence and Normandy. Located in the heart of South Central, Florence and Normandy sat within a neighborhood already dealing with many of the issues that had fueled frustration for years. Residents, they were angry about the verdict. Some simply wanted to vent that anger publicly, or just going out there to loot because that's what they knew was going to happen.
Yeah.
Others, they were curious and came to see what was happening. Still, others arrived looking for confrontation. They said, all right. As more people gathered, you know what happens. The atmosphere became increasingly tense.
Well, at first, incidents, relatively minor. People shouted at passing motorists, some threw bottles and rocks. Traffic slowed as drivers became aware that something unusual was happening. Police officers responded to reports of disturbances, but the crowd continued to grow. Witnesses, they later described a feeling that the situation was changing by the second. What had started as a gathering of angry residents was becoming something more. It was becoming volatile. The crowd's mood shifted from frustration, hostility. People who might never have considered committing a crime on an ordinary day found themselves surrounded by others expressing the same anger and resentment. The sense of restraint that normally governs public behavior began to weaken. And, of course, as nighttime approached, and that's
all the real troublemakers are finally waking up.
There it is, right? I'm like, oh, shit, there we go. The first serious acts of violence occurred. Vehicles stopped in intersections. Drivers pulled from their cars. Some were assaulted. Others managed to escape. Helicopters flew overhead. They began to capture images of the disturbances below, broadcasting them to viewers all across Southern California.
in the nation.
Right. Many people watched television that evening. They could hardly believe what the hell they were seeing. The city had experienced protests before, but nothing like this. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and it was happening in real time, right before a live audience.
They're saying American Funniest Home Videos, buds.
Right. Then, one of the most infamous incidents of the entire riot happened. Approximately 6:45 p.m., a white truck driver named Reginald Denny, white guy named Reginald. Reginald Denny, he entered the intersection of Florence and Normandy while operating an 18-wheeler. He's unaware how dangerous the area had become. Denny, he drove directly into the growing chaos, and within moments his truck was surrounded. A group of men dragged him out into the street, and what followed was captured live on TV. Denny kicked, punched, struck with objects as viewers watched live. One attacker hit him with a concrete block. Another used a piece of machinery taken from the truck. The assault left Denny unconscious and critically injured in the middle of the roadway. See, that's why I get you guys are pissed off at this. At least start attacking cops or something.
Right.
Not just...
Or buildings.
Right.
Or something. You're
not fucking people who are just driving through. Holy shit. What if he got out and he was about ready to get out and start protesting with you? And you don't care. Mm-hmm. He was a white guy. He's about to get his ass whooped. And that was the problem, too. It was only whites and Asians getting their ass whooped.
Well, that attack shocked the nation. Television viewers watched in horror as the footage aired repeatedly throughout the evening. For many Americans, the images of Reginald Denny lying motionless in the street became one of the defining symbols of the riots. Yet, the story didn't end there. Several local residents eventually risked their own safety to help him.
Yeah.
Among them was a woman named Bobby Green, who coordinated efforts to pull Denny from danger and get him to medical attention. Their actions likely saved his life.
Wow.
While the attack demonstrated how dangerous the situation had become, the rescue also served as a reminder that acts of courage and humanity still existed somewhere around there.
Yeah, when you're surrounded by a bunch of animals.
As darkness fell over L.A., the unrest spread beyond Florence and Normandy. Looting began appearing in nearby commercial districts, store windows smashed, merchandise stole, small fires burning. Police officers found themselves increasingly overwhelmed as reports flooded in from multiple locations. The disturbances were no longer confined to a single intersection. What had begun as an angry reaction to the King verdict was rapidly transforming into something much, much larger. Within just a matter of hours, Los Angeles was losing control of the situation, and the worst was still yet to come. As the violence spread from Florence and Normandy, many residents assumed the LAPD would eventually arrive in overwhelming numbers and restore order. No. After all, they say, LAPD is one of the largest and most well-funded police departments in the whole USA.
All right.
Yet, on the night when LA began unraveling, the response many people expected never materialized. Instead, one of the most controversial chapters of the entire riot unfolded as police commanders struggled to understand what was happening. Communication systems began breaking down. Officers withdrew from some of the very locations where violence was escalating. Earlier, when Florence and Normandy was beginning to pop off, the number of officers on scene was relatively small compared to the number of people gathering. And rather than risk having officers surrounded or overwhelmed, a decision was made to pull back.
Yeah.
The reason, they say, was tactical. Police leaders feared that sending small groups of officers into increasingly violent crowds could result in officers being injured, disarmed, or even killed. To many residents, though, the withdrawal looked less like a tactical repositioning and more like abandonment. We'll just let people like Reginald get pulled from his truck.
Right. That's just insane. Television cameras captured scenes that would later become infamous. Vehicles attacked. Businesses looted. Fires burned, yet viewers saw little police. Residents, they called emergency dispatchers asking, where in the hell are the cops? They're like, I don't know. Business owners desperately requested assistance. Some callers, they later reported being placed on hold or receiving no meaningful response. The perception that authorities had disappeared spread rapidly. Whether entirely accurate or not, many people on the streets began to realize something important. There is very little immediate risk of being stopped. And that realization helped fuel the explosion of looting and violence. That
like, ain't nobody coming to stop us. Guess what?
Damn.
Crazy.
And behind those scenes, the department was dealing with serious organizational problems. The LAPD had contingency plans for many emergencies, but the scale and speed of the unrest caught commanders off guard. Reports of violence were coming in from multiple locations simultaneously in a humongous city like LA. Communication systems overwhelmed. Information at headquarters was often incomplete or outdated. Field commanders struggled to get accurate assessments of conditions. Units dispatched to incidents only discovered situations that already changed by the time they arrived. What began as isolated disturbances was quickly becoming a citywide crisis, and the department was struggling to keep up. I mean, they're probably outnumbered 10-1, too, right now.
At least 100-1.
Shit. Much of the criticism that followed focused on Chief Daryl Gates, of course. Somebody's got to take the...
Well, he is a chief.
Right. As the violence began spreading all across L.A., Gates was attending a political fundraising event in Brentwood.
With his buddy OJ. That's where OJ lived.
Supporters later argued that Gates had delegated operational responsibilities to subordinates, and that his attendance at the event was not unusual under normal circumstances.
He knew that he was going to be a freaking the verdict and shit today, dude.
He should have been there. Critics saw it differently, though. To them, the image of the city's top law enforcement official attending a fundraiser while portions of L.A. were descending into chaos became symbolic of a leadership failure. In the years that followed, maybe he thought like the jury was going to be like, nah, they're gonna make these cops guilty.
Yeah, and he was fearing no unrest from the other side of the population. So he's like, we're good.
Like, no, they won't. They'll be mad and pump their fists out the window or something. In the years that followed, Gates' absence during those crucial hours would become one of the most debated aspects of the riot response. I mean, like, he could have done anything anyway.
The confusion was compounded by problems within the department's command structure. Several senior officials were unavailable or located away from headquarters when the unrest began. Why? Right. Decisions that normally might have been made quickly became delayed. Coordination between different units was often inconsistent. Some commanders believed stronger action was needed immediately, while others worried about escalating the situation. As valuable time slipped away, the riots continued spreading. But what might have been contained during the early hours was becoming more difficult to control. The lack of aggressive early response had another unintended consequence, too. It created a powerful visual message for both residents and would-be looters. People saw police cars leaving certain areas. They saw businesses sitting unprotected.
All right.
They saw fires burning without immediate intervention. Word spread quickly that authorities were not in control. Some individuals who had no interest in protesting the Rodney King verdict, they arrived simply because they saw an opportunity to steal merchandise.
Okay.
Others joined crowds because they believed there would be little chance of getting arrested. The original anger surrounding the verdict was now being mixed with opportunistic criminal activity on a massive scale. That's what it turned out to be.
Right.
Business owners were among the first to recognize the severity of the situation. As calls for help went unanswered, some began taking matters into their own hands.
Damn right.
Store owners boarded windows, armed themselves, gathered family members, and prepared to defend their property.
Fuck yeah.
At some neighborhood residents...
Yeah, because those same motherfuckers that are doing that is going to want to come back 2 weeks later and buy a fucking 24 ounce of Colt 45 or something. Right. Fuck out of here.
In some neighborhoods, residents organized informal security groups because they could no longer believe that police protection was coming. These actions would become particularly important in Koreatown, where many merchants soon found themselves standing alone against growing crowds. By late evening, it was becoming increasingly clear that L.A. was facing something far beyond a normal disturbance. Fires were spreading faster than firefighters could extinguish them. Looting was appearing in neighborhood after neighborhood. Assaults were being reported throughout the city. Emergency services were stretched to the breaking point. What started as the outrage turned into full-scale breakdown of public order. The LAPD's early withdrawal and command failures didn't cause the riots. They allowed the situation to grow far larger and more dangerous than it might have otherwise had become.
Nah, they weren't stopping it.
As the night continued, entire sections of LA would descend into chaos, and the city would soon find itself facing one of the worst outbreaks of civil unrest in American history.
Jeez, damn. As the 29th of April turned into the early hours of the 30th, LA entered its most dangerous phase. What had started at Florence and Normandy was no longer confined to a single intersection. The unrest spread outward like a wildfire. Reports of looting, arson, assaults, shootings began pouring in all across the city. Shopping centers attacked, liquor stores stripped, entire blocks engulfed in flames. The situation had moved beyond a protest, beyond even a riot. For many residents, it felt, though, as the normal rules of society had suddenly disappeared. One of the most striking features of the riots was the sheer number of fires. Arson quickly became one of the defining characteristics of unrest. Buildings were not simply being looted. Many were being burned afterward. Some fires were started deliberately as acts of anger. Others, they were set by looters trying to destroy evidence or create distraction. Don't worry, it ain't nobody looking at evidence.
Right.
Whatever the motivation, whatever the result, it all was the same. Flames began appearing faster than firefighters could respond. And during some periods of the riot, emergency dispatchers were receiving reports of new fires every few minutes. Thick columns of black smoke rose into the sky from multiple locations at once, creating an apocalyptic scene visible for miles. The fire department soon found itself facing an impossible task. Fire crews dispatched to burning buildings only encounter hostile crowds. They're like, I ain't getting out. Fuck that. Fire engines became targets. Some firefighters had rocks, bottles, and other objects thrown at them. They're not the ones beating the shit out of fucking people.
Right.
Jeez, people are dumb. Others came under gunfire. In several cases, crews were forced to retreat without extinguishing one single flame. Firefighters are trained to enter burning structures, rescue victims, and protect property, but they're not equipped to operate in the middle of an active civil unrest without police protection. As police resources remain stretched thin, many fires... Sorry.
Hey, bud. Sorry.
Gotta go.
Burn.
Yep. Wow. The destruction spread all throughout the commercial districts at astonishing pace. Businesses taking years or even decades to build, matter of hours gone. Some owners arrived to find their life's work disappearing in flames. Others watched the destruction live on TV because it was too dangerous to reach their stores. Family-owned businesses suffered alongside large corporate chains. Yeah, fuck those corporate chains. Grocery store, yeah, they got like $1 billion insurance. Piss off. Yeah, I don't mind. Go loot and burn down the Walmarts and the Targets and the J.C. Penney's and shit. Leaves the fucking the corner liquor stores and the little, leave them alone. Jeez. Grocery stores, clothing stores, electronic shops, restaurants, pharmacies, auto parts stores, countless other business targets. And for many neighborhoods, these businesses were more than places to shop. They were employers. They were gathering places, vital parts of the local community.
Right, you're just here hurting yourself, guys.
That these guys go to every single day, and their destruction would have consequences long after the riots ended, and you idiots.
Well, looting expanded on a scale few people had imagined. At first, many of the targets were liquor stores and small businesses. Soon, virtually any store with merchandise became vulnerable. Crowds moved through shopping centers carrying TVs, stereos, clothing, shoes, groceries, and anything else they could grab. Some participants appeared motivated by anger over the verdict and broader social conditions. Others, they clearly, like we said, saw an opportunity to steal goods with little fear of immediate arrest. News footage captured scenes of people loading merchandise into cars, shopping carts, and even baby strollers. The line between protest, riot, and outright criminal opportunism, they became increasingly blurred. Violence wasn't limited to property destruction either. Shootings became common throughout affected areas. Some involved confrontations between rioters and business owners. Others stemmed from personal disputes, opportunistic crimes. Yeah, now we're going to go get this motherfucker. Right. Or just conflicts unrelated to the original unrest. Emergency rooms across LA began filling with victims suffering from gunshot wounds, stab wounds, burns, and injuries sustained during assaults. Ambulance crews faced many of the same dangers as firefighters, often requiring police escorts before even entering certain areas, or not even going at all. Hospitals prepared for mass casualty situations as the number of injured continued to rise. For ordinary residents, the experience was terrifying too. Many families barricaded themselves inside their homes and hoped the violence would pass them by. Parents kept children away from windows. People listened to helicopters overhead and sirens in the distance while watching TV reports that seemed to show the city just falling apart. In some neighborhoods, residents organized watches and patrols to protect homes and businesses. Neighbors who barely knew one another suddenly found themselves hand in hand working together because they believed they couldn't rely on outside help. We got to save our own neighborhood, boys.
Yeah. Jeez.
As the night wore on and dawn approached, the scale of the disaster became impossible to ignore. Hundreds of fires, entire commercial corridors gone, emergency services overwhelmed. TV broadcasts carried images of burning buildings around the clock. The riots were no longer a local disturbance. They had become national news and one of America's most serious urban crises. And one of the most serious urban crises in American history. Yet, amid all the destruction unfolding across LA, one neighborhood was about to experience some of the worst devastation of all. And that, my friends, is Koreatown, where thousands of business owners and residents were preparing to face the riots largely on their own.
Oh, they knew exactly what was happening.
Fucked up shit that day happened because Koreatown was literally like bordered by the white community, and they literally cordoned off the white community to stop people from going in there. That's fucked up, dude.
Among all the stories that emerged from 1992, few have become more famous than what happened in Koreatown.
Yep.
Decades later, many people know the images of armed Korean business owners standing on rooftops with rifles and shotguns. On the internet, they would eventually become known as the roof Koreans. But those famous photographs tell only a small part of what happened. The reality was far more complicated, far more dangerous, far more desperate, and far more tragic than a handful of images can capture. Let's take a look and see how we can understand why that Koreatown became one of the hardest hit areas. You have to understand both the neighborhood itself and the tensions that existed long before the first fires were ever set. During the 70s and 80s, thousands of Korean immigrants, they arrived in L.A. seeking economic opportunity.
And where do you think they ended up?
Like many immigrant groups before them, they often entered industries that often relatively low barriers to entry. Korean families opened liquor stores, convenience stores, grocery markets, dry cleaners, small retail shops, saloons, salons, all that good stuff. Many of these businesses were located in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods, where property was more affordable and commercial opportunities available. Building a business often required enormous sacrifices. Families worked long hours, sometimes even 7 days a week, while pooling resources to keep stores operating. For many immigrants, these businesses represented years of hard work, personal risk, and hopes for a better future. But at that very same time, tensions sometimes developed between Korean merchants and some of the communities they served. Sorry that the Koreans didn't want people coming in stealing from them.
Right.
Holy shit.
Hurry up and buy.
Yeah. Language barriers created misunderstandings. Cultural differences sometimes led to resentment. Customers occasionally felt they were treated with suspicion and disrespect. Store owners often felt vulnerable to crime and theft. In many cases, neither side fully understood the experiences or concerns of the other. They didn't care. While countless daily interactions occurred without incident, a series of highly publicized disputes deepened mistrust. None was more significant than Latasha Harlan's death. Although one store owner was responsible for that shooting, many residents came to associate the incident with broader frustrations involving every fucking Korean in this city. By 1992, those tensions were still very much alive. Yeah, they just needed that Rodney King just to get it on going. When the riots began on 29th of April, Koreatown quickly found itself in an especially dangerous position. Geographically, the neighborhood sat between several of the area experiences some of the worst unrest. As violence spread westward from South Central, businesses in Koreatown increasingly became targets. Store windows smashed, merchandise looted, buildings on fire. Business owners called the police seeking assistance, but none showed up. The LAPD was already overwhelmed, struggling to respond to emergencies across all the city. Sorry, Koreatown. In the eyes of many Korean merchants, they had effectively been abandoned. And then the fucking the American dream, baby.
Get abandoned by the Povos?
Yeah.
As reports of attacks spread, business owners they began contacting one another. Families gathered inside stores. Friends and relatives rushed to help protect the businesses. Some merchants armed themselves with legally owned firearms. That's important.
All right.
Others improvised defensive positions using rooftops, parking lots, and storefront entrances. Some cases, people who had never expected to carry weapons suddenly found themselves standing guard over everything they had spent years building, not even knowing what the hell they even have in their hand. They weren't preparing for a battle because they wanted one, obviously. They were preparing because they needed one. I think that makes sense. The scenes that followed become some of the most iconic images. Armed merchants on the rooftops overlooking streets filled with smoke and chaos. Others positioned themselves behind sandbags, vehicles, or makeshift barricades. Groups coordinated by radio and telephone sharing information about fires, looting, and threats moving through the neighborhood. Gunfire occasionally erupted as business owners attempted to deter looters or defend their property. For many Korean Americans, the experience was deeply traumatic. They felt caught between a city in chaos and a government that failed to protect them. While the rooftop defenders became famous, the overwhelming majority of Korean Americans, they experienced the riot not as armed defenders, but as victims of devastating financial loss. Thousands of Korean-owned businesses were damaged, looted, and destroyed. Entire shopping centers were gone. Family businesses that had taken decades to build disappeared overnight. Some owners lost everything they owned. Insurance coverage often proved inadequate. Others discovered that rebuilding would require resources they just didn't have. Financial impact on the Korean American community was staggering, with losses eventually reaching hundreds of millions of dollars.
Damn.
The destruction left a lasting scar on the community, too. Many business owners later described feeling forgotten during discussions about the riots.
I mean, what are you going to do? They can't just stop and just help you guys out.
We're talking about just discussions
Right.
afterwards. They didn't even bring them up.
Right.
Who cares about what happened to the Koreans?
All right.
National conversations often focus on Rodney, policing, race relations, and the violence itself, all of which were important topics. But Many Korean Americans felt that the suffering of their community received comparatively little attention.
Mm-hmm.
Families who had lost businesses, homes, and life savings struggled for years to recover. Some never even opened again. Others left LA for good, said we're getting out of here.
Yeah, good luck.
Yet that story of Koreatown is not simply one of destruction. It's also a story of resilience. Neighbors helped one another rebuild. Community organizations raised money and provided support. Churches became centers of relief and recovery. Families who had lost nearly everything, they started to work over. In the years that followed, Koreatown would recover and eventually become one of the most vibrant neighborhoods in LA.
Yep.
But in that spring of 92, none of that was certain. As fires burned across the city and merchants stood guard over what remained of their livelihoods, Koreatown became one of the clearest examples of how completely public order had broken down. The riots, they were affecting every community differently, and behind every burning building was a personal story of fear, loss, survival, and resilience. Crazy.
Wow. All those stats from 1992 tell a story, and only part of it, though. More than 60 people killed, thousands injured, 11,000 arrested. Property damage exceeded billions. But numbers alone cannot explain what it was like to live through those 6 days.
6 days.
Behind every headline was a real person trying to survive one of the most chaotic periods in American history. Some became nationally known, others largely forgotten outside their own families and communities. But altogether, their experiences reveal the human side of the riots in a way casualty figures and damage estimates never can. And one of the most widely recognized victims, as we said, was old Reginald.
Oh, Reginald.
In the immediate aftermath of the assault, many people assumed Denny would die. He suffered fractured skull, severe neurological damage, and multiple other injuries that required extensive medical treatment, which left him in debt for the rest of his life because ain't nobody else paying for it but him. The images of him lying unconscious in the street became one of the defining symbols of the riots. But Denny did survive. His recovery was long and difficult. And years later, he continued dealing with the physical and emotional effects of what had happened. Despite the brutality of the attack, Denny often spoke publicly about forgiveness rather than revenge. His willingness to move forward surprised many people who expected him to remain consumed by anger.
What the hell is he going to do about it now?
Right. Another victim who received significant attention, Fidel Lopez. He was a 47-year-old Guatemalan immigrant, construction worker. And on the 30th of April, Lopez drove into an area overwhelmed by unrest, and he quickly found himself surrounded by a crowd. What followed was one of the most horrifying assaults of the entire riot. Lopez dragged from his truck, beaten, robbed, and nearly killed. Attackers smashed a car stereo against his head, kicked him repeatedly, spray painted his body, oh, NWO, baby, for life, and doused him with gasoline. Oh, no!
Oh.
Some members of the crowd reportedly discussed setting him on fire, and Lopez's life was ultimately saved when several individuals intervened. Most notably, a local minister named Benny Newton. He physically placed himself between Lopez and the mob. Lopez survived, but he suffered devastating injuries that required extensive medical treatment. His story became another example of how quickly ordinary people can become victims of extraordinary violence.
And like I said, old firefighters face dangers that many people never expected. During most disasters, firefighters are viewed as neutral responders. Whether dealing with house fires, car accidents, natural disasters, they typically enter dangerous situations knowing the public wants them there. The riots, they changed that. Fire crews responding to burning structures often encountered hostile crowds. Some had rocks and bottles thrown at them. Others came under gunfire. Many later described the riots as unlike anything they had experienced in their careers. No shit.
All right.
Business owners throughout LA, they face heartbreaking decisions too. Some stayed and tried to protect their stores. Others fled when it became clear they couldn't stop the crowds. Many watched years or decades of work disappear in a single minute. Family-owned businesses were particularly vulnerable. For some immigrant families, a liquor store, a market, or a small retail shop, they represented a lifetime of savings and sacrifice. Parents, they worked long hours. Children, they helped after school. They had no choice.
Right.
Entire families depended on the income generated by those businesses. When the buildings burned, many owners lost far more than property. They lost financial security, retirement plans, and dreams they spent years pursuing. Journalists, they found themselves in unusual danger as well. Good. Television crews documenting the riots often operated in unpredictable environments where crowds could turn hostile without warning. Reporters witnessed assaults, shootings, fires, and looting firsthand. Helicopter crews captured dramatic footage from above while ground crews attempted to navigate increasingly dangerous streets. Their reporting helped the country understand what was happening, but it also placed them directly in harm's way. Some reporters later described the riots as the most dangerous assignment of their careers. Talk to the war reporters.
Right.
Popos, they experienced the riots from a different perspective, back at the fucking office. Many found themselves responding to incident after incident with limited resources and incomplete information. Officers were dispatched to fires, assaults, shootings, and looting calls simultaneously. Some worked exhausting shifts while others watched the city spiral further out of control. Others faced criticism for the department's failures and withdrawals. Years later, many officers still describe the riots as one of the most difficult and traumatic periods of their careers. They were witnessing the breakdown of public order on a scale few had ever imagined or seen since.
Crazy. Well, stories of people like Reginald and Fidel Lopez, they became famous because cameras happened to capture their suffering. But there was also countless of others who never received any national attention. Some lost homes, others lost businesses, and some lost loved ones. Many carried emotional scars long after the fires were extinguished and the news crews left. The riots were not just a story about politics, police, and race or economics. They were also a story about ordinary people whose lives were changed forever during 6 days of chaos.
That's the name of the episode. 6 days of chaos.
As LA struggled to regain control, officials realized that local resources alone were no longer enough.
You think?
Right. Help would have to come from outside the city. And soon thousands of soldiers, Marines, and National Guard troops would begin arriving. Finally, by the morning of the 30th of April, it had become painfully obvious that LA was facing a crisis far beyond the capabilities of local law. The riots had spread all across many neighborhoods. LAPD was still struggling to regain control. City leaders knew that if additional resources were not brought in quickly, the situation could become worse. What followed was one of the largest domestic military deployments in American history. Local authorities, state officials, and federal government workers, they worked together to restore order to a city that seemed to be slipping away. Mayor Tom Bradley spent much of the first night and following morning attempting to coordinate a response while also appealing for calm. Bradley
You're the one that fucking kind of did it by coming out and saying, "Oh, this can't undo what we saw on the video."
Right.
Fucking retard.
Dumbass. Bradley understood the significance of what was happening. He had grown up experiencing racial discrimination. He served as LA police officer, later became the first city's black mayor. Throughout the crisis, he repeatedly urged...
You rearrange those words how you see fit, people?
And he repeatedly urged residents to stay off the streets and avoid further violence. This is not what we want to do. But speeches alone were not going to stop riots. In the city, they needed manpower, and it needed fast. California Governor Pete Wilson, he responded by activating the California National Guard. On paper, this seemed like a straightforward solution. The National Guard exists specifically for situations like natural disasters, civil disturbances, and emergencies. In reality, however, deploying thousands of troops into a major American city was far more complicated. No, it's not. Troops had to be assembled, transported, equipped, briefed, and organized before they could effectively operate. The public often, that's what they train for. Right. That's what the National Guard's for. They should already know. The public often imagines soldiers immediately pouring into the streets that the moment the order is given. But the process takes time. Those delays will become a source of frustration as the violence continues. But it shouldn't take time. That's what it's fucking for. Especially the National Guard, because they work, what? A couple weekends a fucking year? Fuck out of here.
2 weekends a month. The first National Guard units began mobilizing April 30th, but many arrived to find confusion waiting for them. Some troops lacked clear instructions. Others encountered logistical problems involving weapons, ammo, transportation, and communications equipment. Many National Guard members were part-time soldiers who trained regularly but did not spend every day performing military duties. They suddenly found themselves being sent into one of the most chaotic urban environments in modern American history. Despite those challenges, though, Guard units gradually established positions throughout the city and began assisting law enforcement with security operations. For residents of LA, the sight was extraordinary. Military vehicles appeared on city streets. Soldiers carrying rifles stood at intersections. Troops established checkpoints and security positions around damaged areas. For many younger residents, it was the first time they ever seen military personnel deployed inside their own city.
Good.
Some people viewed the troops as a reassuring sign that order would soon be restored. Others, they found the sight unsettling, believing it demonstrated just how serious the situation had become. Well, no shit. Yet, even as National Guard troops arrived, officials worried that additional help might still be necessary.
Nah, I don't think so.
The scale of the unrest remained enormous. Fires, they were continuing burning. Shootings, they didn't stop. Businesses, they're going down. May 1st, President George H.W. Bush, he addressed the nation from the White House. May 1st, bro? Bush condemned the violence, expressed support for restoring order, and announced that federal resources would be deployed to assist California authorities. The federal government was now becoming directly involved in the effort to stabilize L.A.
Okay.
Under federal authority, additional military forces were ordered into the area. Elements of the United States Army and United States Marine Corps, they began preparing for deployment. Damn. Many of the Marines came from nearby Camp Pendleton, located roughly 80 miles south of L.A.
Not bad.
Some had recently returned from service during Operation Desert Storm, and now they found themselves preparing for an entirely different type of mission. Instead of foreign battlefields, they're now operating on American soil.
Foreign and domestic. The arrival of the Marines drew enormous public attention. Images of Marines patrolling L.A. neighborhoods became some of the most memorable photographs of the riots. Their presence reflected the seriousness of it all. The federal government does not deploy active duty military forces into domestic disturbances lightly, no. The fact that Marines and Army troops were being sent into L.A., it showed just how dangerous this situation was becoming. They didn't want to lose one of the biggest cities in America. You can't do it. Sorry.
And how completely fucked the local authorities fucked up.
Military forces established themselves throughout the city. The balance slowly began to shift. Curfews were enforced and aggressively forced. Key intersections secured. Looting more difficult to do.
Well, everything's looted.
Right. Businesses that had survived the first days of unrest gained some protection. Firefighters could operate more safely. Residents that had spent days fearing for their safety began seeing signs that order might eventually return to, like, the fucking grass needs to be mowed. They need to get over here. Son of a bitch.
All right. Son of a gun.
One of the most famous moments during this period came not from a politician or a military commander, but Rodney King himself, the fucker who started it all. On the 1st of May, as the riots continued, King appeared before reporters and delivered a brief emotional statement. Visibly distressed by the violence unfolding all across L.A., he asked a question that would become permanently linked to the riots. He said, "Can we all get along?" The plea was simple. Some say it was heartfelt, and it was definitely scripted.
Unscripted? What the fuck you got to script it for anyways?
Well, it did not immediately end the violence. It became one of the defining moments.
Damn it. Well, Rodney said we should all get along. Well, damn you, Rodney.
It made for a good episode in living color. Jeez. This is the most recognizable quotes from that era, and we still say it to today. Right. Over the next several days, the combined efforts of LAPD, sheriffs, deputies, National Guard, and armies. The violence did not stop at once. Isolated incidents still continued. Fires still broke out. Arrests still climbed. But the worst phase of the riots was beginning to pass. The city that had seemed on the verge of complete collapse only days earlier was slowly regaining stability. When the unrest finally came to an end, L.A. would be left to confront the staggering damage, the lives that had been lost, and the difficult question of what the true cost of the riots had been.
And now they're facing reconstruction.
Oh, my. Jeez. By the time the riots finally began winding down early May of 1992, L.A. looked like a city that had survived a natural disaster. Entire commercial district had been reduced to blackened ruins. Hundreds of businesses stood gutted and abandoned. Smell of smoke lingered in the air long after the fires were gone. National Guard troops and military personnel remained visible throughout affected neighborhoods. Police officers continued making arrests and enforcing curfews. And the violence that had exploded after the King verdict was gradually coming to an end. But the scale of the destruction was only the beginning.
Well, officially, the riots lasted April 29th through May 4th, although most of the violence obviously occurred during the first 3 days. As military forces established control and curfews were enforced more effectively, incidents of looting, arson, and assault steadily declined. Crowds that had once moved freely through the streets found themselves facing armed soldiers, police checkpoints, and a vastly increased law enforcement presence. The sense that authorities had lost control, which had fueled so much of the unrest during the opening hours, well, that was slowly replaced by the realization that the state had reasserted its authority. When investigators began calculating the human toll, the numbers were staggering. At least 63 people dead, although some sources have reported slightly different totals, obviously, depending on how deaths were classified. More than 2,000 people suffered injuries ranging from minor wounds to life-threatening gunshot injuries, burns, and severe beatings. Victims, they came from every background imaginable. Some were innocent bystanders caught in the chaos. Others were business owners defending property. Some, they were looters, rioters, or individuals involved in violent confrontations. The violence didn't discriminate neatly along racial, economic, or social lines. Black, Latino, white, and Asian residents all appeared among the dead and injured. The arrest totals, those were equally remarkable. More than 11,000 people were taken into custody over the course of the riots. Police departments, sheriff's deputies, military personnel found themselves processing arrests around the clock. Temporary detention facilities had to be established because traditional jail space quickly became overwhelmed. Many arrests involved looting, burglary, curfew violations, and vandalism. The authorities also arrested individuals for more serious offenses, which included assault, arson, and weapons violations. The sheer volume of arrests reflected the scale and the unrest of the difficulty authorities faced in regaining control once the riots had spread across multiple neighborhoods. The financial damage, it was almost beyond comprehension. Estimates eventually exceeded $1 billion, making the LA riots one of the most expensive episodes of civil unrest in American history. More than 1,000 buildings damaged or destroyed. Thousands of businesses suffered some level of loss. Insurance companies were inundated with claims. Probably most of them got declined too. Entire shopping centers gone. Family-owned stores that had survived neighborhoods for decades or served neighborhoods for decades were gone. Some business owners arrived after the violence ended and found nothing but ashes and twisted metal. For many, there would be no reopening. The dream they had spent years building had vanished in a matter of hours. Like we said, Koreatown suffered most of the severe economic losses. Thousands of Korean-owned businesses were damaged, looted, or destroyed. The financial impact on the Korean-American community alone reached hundreds of millions of dollars. Many families discovered that insurance payments that would only cover a fraction of what had been lost. Others learned that rebuilding just would take years, if ever. The destruction left scars that remained visible long after national media went elsewhere looking for the next juicy story. The emotional toll, it proved even harder to measure. Residents who had lived through the riots often described a lingering sense of trauma. Parents remembered trying to reassert their children while listening to gunfire outside their home. Business owners remembered standing guard with firearms, unsure whether they would survive the night. Firefighters remembered watching buildings burn because conditions made it too dangerous to intervene. And the police officers remembered being overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the crisis. For many people, the memories never completely faded. When this calm returned, LA found itself confronting uncomfortable questions. How had one of America's largest cities descended into such chaos? Why had authorities been unable to contain the violence during its early stages because they tried not to? Why had so many residents felt so disconnected from the institutions that were supposed to serve them? The riots had exposed deep divisions involving race, policing, economics, and political leadership. Simply restoring order didn't solve those problems, and in many ways it merely revealed how serious they became. Yet, amid the destruction, there were also countless examples of courage and compassion. Neighbors protected one another, strangers rescued victims from violent crowds, community groups organized relief efforts, religious organizations distributed food and supplies, volunteers they helped clean debris and board up damaged buildings. While the riot showcased some of humanity's worst impulses, they also revealed examples of some people risking their own lives to help others. These stories often received less attention, obviously, than the fires and the violence, but they were just as much as part of what happened. By May 4th, the riots were over. Fires had largely been extinguished, curfews were being lifted, military forces remained present, but the immediate crisis had passed. LA had survived 6 days of violence that would leave a permanent mark on the city's history. Yet the end of the riots didn't mean the end of the story. The questions surrounding Rodney King, the officers involved in his beating, and the justice system that had sparked so much anger were far from settled. In fact, another courtroom battle was about to begin, one that would once again place the officers at the center of a national attention. For many Americans, the story seemed finished once the riots ended. The officers were already acquitted. LA had burned. More than 60 people were dead, thousands injured. Yet inside the federal government, officials were examining whether another legal path remained available. While the Constitution's protection against double jeopardy generally prevents someone from being tried twice for the same crime, state and federal governments are considered separate jurisdictions. That meant the acquittals in California state court didn't necessarily prevent the federal government from pursuing civil rights charges. As the smoke cleared from LA, federal prosecutors began investigating whether the officers had violated Rodney King's constitutional rights. The decision to pursue a federal case was significant. The riots had demonstrated how deeply many Americans distrusted the outcome of the state trial. Federal officials understood that any new prosecution would likely be closely watched. At the same time, they also knew that bringing charges simply to satisfy public anger would be inappropriate. Prosecutors needed hard evidence that federal civil rights laws had actually been violated. Investigators reviewed testimony, examined the videotape again and again, interviewed witnesses, and evaluated whether the officers had willfully deprived Rodney King of rights protected under the Constitution. Eventually, federal prosecutors decided to move forward. August 92, a federal grand jury indicted Sergeant Stacy Kuhn and officers Lawrence Powell, Theodore Briseno, and Timothy Wind on charges related to violating King's civil rights. The case would once again place the officers under a national spotlight. For many residents of LA, the announcement was welcome news. Others viewed it as an attempt to retry a case that had already been decided. Once again, opinions about the officers, the beating, and the justice system was sharply divided. That federal trial began in February of 93, nearly 2 years after the beating. Unlike the state trial in Simi Valley, the federal proceedings took place in downtown LA. Jury selection became a major focus from the start. Prosecutors and defense attorneys worked to assemble a panel that could fairly evaluate the evidence, so they say, despite the enormous publicity surrounding the case. The resulting jury was far more diverse than the one that had heard the state case. Many observers immediately noted the difference. Still, both sides understood that the verdict would ultimately depend on the evidence presented in court rather than public opinion outside. Much of the evidence was familiar. Once again, got the videotape. Once again, they argued Rodney King's actions. Once again, police training, use of force policies, and officer decision-making became central issues. Yet there was an important difference between the federal and state cases. The question was no longer simply whether the officers had to use excessive force under California law. Federal prosecutors, they were attempting to prove that the officers had violated King's civil rights. That required demonstrating that not just the force had been used, but it had been used unlawfully and intentionally. Rodney King himself testified during the trial. For many jurors, hearing directly from the man at the center of the case added a human dimension that legal arguments alone couldn't provide. Medical experts described the injuries he suffered. Witnesses recounted what they seen that night. Prosecutors argued that the beating represented a clear abuse of authority. Defense attorneys maintained that the officers were attempting to control a resistant suspect in a dangerous situation. The same basic arguments that had divided the public for nearly 2 years are once again being called out before a jury. As the trial neared its conclusion, many people feared another acquittal and could reignite unrest. City officials quietly prepared contingency plans this time. Businesses reviewed security procedures. Law enforcement agencies monitored the situation closely. Memories of April 92, they were still really fresh. Nobody wanted to see LA experience another explosion of violence. The tension surrounding the verdict was nowhere near the level seen during the state trial, but still substantial. Everybody understood the stakes. April 17, 1993, the jury returned its decision. This time, the outcome was different. Sergeant Stacy Kuhn and Officer Lawrence Powell were found guilty of violating King's civil rights. Officers Theodore Briseno and Timothy Wind acquitted. The mixed verdict reflected the jury's conclusion that not all 4 officers bore the same level of responsibility. Nevertheless, for many people, the convictions represented a measure of accountability that had been absent after the state trial. The reaction across LA was noticeably different from what happened a year earlier. There were demonstrations and strong opinions on both sides, but the widespread violence that many feared never materialized. The city remained calm. Some residents expressed relief that convictions had finally been secured. Others believed the officers had been unfairly targeted. Regardless of where people stood, the outcome marked a major turning point in the long legal saga surrounding the King beating. Later that year, Kuhn and Powell were sentenced to 30 months in federal prison. The sentences generated their own controversy. Some critics argued they would be too lenient given the severity of the beating. Oh, fuck off. Supporters of the officers argued that any prison sentence was excessive. Fuck off. Appeals followed, and the case eventually reached the Supreme Court of the United States, which upheld the sentences. Kuhn and Powell ultimately served their prison terms before being released in the mid-90s. Those federal convictions didn't erase the damage caused by the riots, obviously, nor did they resolve the deeper issues involving the race, policing, and trust that had contributed. What they did provide was a different ending to a legal story that many people expected after the state acquittals. For some, the convictions restored a degree of faith, just a small degree of faith in the justice system. For others, they raised new questions about law enforcement, accountability, and the role of federal intervention. Meanwhile, LA faced an even larger challenge than any courtroom verdict could ever solve: rebuilding neighborhoods, repairing relationships, and trying to recover from one of the most destructive episodes in the city's history. When the TV cameras left and the fires were finally extinguished, many people assumed the hardest part was over. In reality, LA was now facing a challenge that would take years rather than days to overcome. Entire neighborhoods were gone, thousands of businesses gone, trust between community gone. Residents wanted answers, reforms, and recovery. Politicians promised change. Community leaders demanded action. The question was whether these promises would actually translate into meaningful improvements or simply become another set of political speeches forgotten once public attention moved somewhere else. In the months after the unrest, another investigation was launched. This one became known as the Webster Commission, named after former FBI and CIA Director William Webster, who chaired the panel. Unlike the earlier Christopher Commission, which focused heavily on police culture and excessive force, this one concentrated on the LAPD's response during the riots themselves. Investigators examined command decisions, communication failures, deployment problems, and coordination between agencies. Their findings were often harsh. The commission concluded that the department had been poorly prepared for large-scale civil unrest, communication systems had failed during the critical moments, and that leadership decisions contributed to the loss of control during the opening stages of the riots. Particular attention was paid to the withdrawal from Florence and Normandy, the confusion within the command structure, and the delayed deployment of resources. Investigators found that the LAPD had contingency plans for emergencies, but they lacked a comprehensive strategy for responding to an event that grew as rapidly as the riots did. The report recommended significant changes in training, communications, emergency planning, and coordination with outside agencies. Much like the Christopher Commission before it, the Webster Commission reinforced the idea that the riots had exposed serious weaknesses that could not simply be ignored. And as you would think, leadership changes soon followed. Under growing pressure, Darrell Gates retired as chief of the police in June of '92, ended a controversial 14-year tenure that had shaped the department more than perhaps any chief before him. Gates remained a polarizing figure, though. Supporters credited him with innovations such as SWAT, argued that he fought aggressively against gangs and violent crime. Critics viewed him as the embodiment of a policing philosophy that had alienated large segments of LA. Regardless of that perspective, his departure symbolized the end of an era for the LAPD. The department that emerged in the years following the riots looked different from the one that entered them. New leadership placed greater emphasis on community policing, an approach that encouraged officers to build relationships within neighborhoods rather than simply respond to crimes after they occurred. Recruitment efforts sought to create a police force that was more closely reflected the city's diverse population. Training programs increasingly focused on communication, de-escalation, and cultural awareness. New systems were implemented to identify officers who generated unusually high numbers of complaints. Civilian oversight mechanisms were strengthened, though debates continued over whether those reforms went far enough. Obviously, all this didn't happen overnight, nor did they solve every problem. Tensions between police and communities continued to surface in later years. New controversies emerged. Critics argued that some changes were cosmetic rather than transformational. Others believed the department had improved significantly compared to that time in the early 90s. The truth largely depended on who was being asked and what experience they had with the law enforcement. What was clear, however, was the riots. They forced conversations that city leaders could no longer avoid. Beyond policing, the riots also sparked broader discussions about poverty, education, employment, housing, and economic opportunity. Many observers argued that focusing exclusively on police reform ignored deeper issues that had contributed to the unrest. The neighborhoods most heavily affected by the riots had often been struggling long before King was beaten or Latasha Harlins was killed. Factory closures, unemployment, gang violence, failing schools, and decades of disinvestment, they all played roles that led to that uprising in 1992. If LA had hoped to avoid a similar crisis in the future, many believe those underlying problems would have to be addressed as well. The years after the riots became a period of reflection and reform and debate. Some changes, they were implemented quickly, others took years. Some succeeded, others didn't. One thing was undeniable, though. The events of 1992 permanently altered the way LA thought about policing, race relations, public trust, and government accountability. The city would spend decades wrestling with the lessons of those 6 days. But while institutions were changing and neighborhoods were rebuilding, one of the central figures in the entire story was facing a very different challenge. Rodney King had become one of the most recognizable people in America. Life after the riots would prove far more complicated than many people imagined. While city leaders debated reforms and communities struggled to rebuild, Rodney, he found himself living a life he never asked for and probably never expected. Before March of 91, he had been an ordinary man, known mostly to friends, families, and the people in his immediate circle. After the beating and the riots, though, he became one of the most recognizable figures, like we said. His name was discussed in courtrooms, city halls, newsrooms, and living rooms across the country. Politicians referenced him. Activists referenced him. Journalists interviewed him. Yet, despite becoming a symbol in one of the most important civil rights stories of the late 20th century, he remained a human being trying to navigate extraordinary circumstances that would have been difficult for anybody. In the immediate aftermath, he was thrust in the spotlight unlike anything he had never experienced. Reporters, everybody wanted interviews. Television networks wanted appearances. Public interest in his life was enormous. Many people viewed him as a victim of police brutality. Others focused on his criminal record and the high-speed chase that had preceded the beating. As a result, he became a controversial public figure despite never seeking the role. He was no longer simply Rodney King, the construction worker. He had become Rodney King, the symbol. And living as a symbol turned out to be far more difficult than many observers realized. Well, King did receive some compensation. 1994, the city of LA agreed to pay him approximately $3.8 million in a civil settlement related to the beating. To many people, that sounded like an enormous amount of money. Yet, money alone couldn't erase the physical injuries, emotional trauma, or the pressures that came with being one of the most famous victims of police violence in American history. King had suffered serious injuries during the beating, but he also carried the burden of constant public attention. Every mistake he made seemed to become news. Unfortunately for him, life after the settlement was often turbulent. He struggled with substance abuse for much of his adult life, and those problems continued after the riots. Over the years, give him money now. Over the years, he faced various legal troubles involving alcohol, drug use, driving offenses. He entered rehabilitation programs multiple times in an effort to address his addiction issues. Friends and families often described a man who was trying to cope with circumstances that would have overwhelmed many people. The same media attention that had been focused on the beating now frequently focused on his personal struggles. Yet there were also periods when King attempted to use his experience for positive purposes. He gave interviews about race relations, policing, and reconciliation. He participated in documentaries and public discussions about the riots and their aftermath. At times, he expressed frustration over how his name had become attached to events beyond his control. At other times, he spoke about forgiveness and moving forward. People often wanted him to serve as a symbol of one side or another in larger political debates, but King, he himself frequently seemed more interested in finding peace than continuing old battles. As the years passed, the King beating remained a major reference point whenever discussions about police misconduct emerged in America. New indictments involving law enforcement were often compared to what happened in LA. Journalists revisited the case, historians examined its significance. Documentaries, they explored its impact, and through it all, King's name remained permanently tied to one of the most important moments in modern American history. Then, June 17, 2012, Rodney King was found at the bottom of a swimming pool at his home in Rialto, California, 47 years old. Investigators, they determined that he accidentally drowned. Toxicology reports indicated alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, and PCP were present in his system at the time of his death. That's a hell of a party. The news prompted another wave of reflection about his life and legacy. Many people remembered the man from the videotape. Others remembered his plea for unity during the riots. Some focused on his personal struggles, and all were part of the story. In death, as in life, Rodney King remained a complicated figure. He was neither a saint nor a villain. He was a flawed man who became the center of events far larger than himself. His beating exposed issues that millions of America could no longer ignore. The riots that followed changed LA and America forever. The debate sparked by those events continued to this very day. Yet even after all the court cases, investigations, reforms, documentaries, and discussions, old Rodney King remains a reminder that history is often shaped not only by presidents, police chiefs, and politicians, but also just by ordinary people who suddenly find themselves caught in extraordinary moments. His story may have ended in 2012, but the questions raised by what happened to him continue to echo all across America. More than 3 decades after the fires were extinguished, the 1992 LA riots remain one of the most important and most debated events in modern American history. The passage of time has not settled every argument about what happened or why. In fact, many of the same questions people were asking in 92 are still being debated today. Historians, journalists, police officials, community leaders, politicians, and just ordinary citizens continue examining the riots as they touch on issues that extend far beyond LA. race, policing, poverty, economic inequality, government accountability, public trust, media influence, and the relationship between communities and law that were all wrapped together in a single explosive event that forced the entire country to confront uncomfortable realities. For many people, the riots became a symbol of the dangers that arise when trust between the law and public breaks down. The King beating, the acquittals, and the riots that followed demonstrated how quickly long-standing grievances could erupt when large portions of the community believed the justice system was no longer treating them fairly. The event became a case study taught in police academies, universities, public policy programs. Future law enforcement leaders spent years studying what went wrong, not only during the beating, but also during the department's response to the unrest. The riots helped shape conversations about police accountability that continue right now. Others, they view the riots through a broader economic lens. They argue that focusing solely on Rodney King misses much of the larger story. By 1992, many neighborhoods in LA had already spent years dealing with all that stuff we described. To these observers, the riots were not simply about a controversial verdict. That verdict may have been the spark, but the deeper causes had been developed in for decades upon decades upon decades. The destruction that followed reflected frustrations that extended far beyond a single courtroom decision. The riots also forced difficult conversations about race relations in all of America. The violence affected Black, Latino, white, Asian, and immigrant communities in different ways. The devastation in Koreatown highlighted tensions that often received little attention before 92. The experiences of those guys and their businesses, they became a part of the historical discussion, demonstrating how different communities could be affected by the same event in dramatically different ways. In the years that followed, many organizations worked to improve understanding and cooperation between communities that had often interacted economically but rarely engaged with one another on a deeper level. And the role of the media became another lasting topic of discussion. Of course it is. The King beating was one of the first major incidents of police misconduct captured on video and broadcast to a mass audience. The riots themselves unfolded live on TV. Millions of people saw it. Images of Reginald Denny burning buildings, rooftop defenders in Koreatown, National Guard troops patrolling city streets became permanently embedded in the public memory. In many ways, the riots foreshadowed a future where cameras, video recordings, and instant access to info played an increasingly important role in public debates about policing and social justice. When later incidents involving police use of force occurred in cities across the United States, comparisons to LA obviously followed. Journalists, activists, and public officials frequently look back to 92 as they try to understand newer controversies. The names changed, locations changed, circumstances changed, yet many of the underlying questions remain remarkably similar. How should police be held accountable? How can trust be built between law enforcement and the communities they serve? What role do poverty and economic opportunity play in social unrest? And how can governments recognize and address problems before they reach a crisis point? These questions were relevant in 1992, and they remain relevant today. The legacy of the riots is also visible in LA itself. Some neighborhoods eventually recovered and even prospered. Others struggled for years. Certain commercial corridors were rebuilt, some businesses returned, others never even reopened. New generations grew up in areas forever shaped by what happened that night, or that summer. Physical scars faded over the time, but memories often remained. Residents who lived through the riots still remember the smoke, the helicopters, the sirens, the uncertainty, and the feeling that their city had suddenly become unrecognizable. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of the LA riots is that major events rarely have a single cause. It's tempting to search for one explanation because simple answers are easier to understand, but history of 92 resists simple explanations. They were about Rodney King, but much more than him. They were about policing. They were about economics. They were about race. They're also about politics, leadership, opportunity, and trust. Every attempt to reduce the riots to one issue leaves out important parts of the story. That complexity is precisely why the events of 92 continue to be studied, debated, and remembered. The LA riots were not just a local disturbance or a temporary outbreak of violence. They were a moment when decades of tension collided in full view of the nation. The consequences were measured in lives lost, communities damaged, and billions of dollars in destruction. They're also measured in reforms, conversations, and lessons that continue influencing America more than 30 years later. The story of the 1992 LA riots may have ended in May of that year, but the questions raised by those 6 days, they're still being asked, and many times not even answered today. Whoa! Oh, Lord, that was a long one, y'all. with that, there ain't gonna be no sloppy talking at the end of this. You guys already know the deal. Subscribe, like, comment, share us with friends, and we'll see you next week for more Outlaws and Gunslingers for the month of Michigan. Bang, bang.